Hi, Tim here with StudentAthleteWorld.com. This week we have Richie Schueler, former college basketball coach, in studio with us. So we're going to do a little Q&A and learn a thing or two from Coach Schueler. Richie played Division I basketball at University of Evansville and then coached 10 years at the college level at all levels, Division I, II, and III. He coached at Austin Peay University, Wilmington College,
Correct.
And the last 4 years at St. Andrews College as a head men's basketball coach. So want to ask Richie a few questions so we can learn from his coaching experience that will help you as potential college athletes. So Richie, the first thing is, in your coaching experience, what were some of the biggest mistakes that student athletes and families made in the process?
You know, probably the biggest mistake that I see is oftentimes student athletes don't communicate properly with the college coaches. College coaches will oftentimes call as many times as they can to a student athlete, to families. They'll send emails, they'll send stuff in the mail, but oftentimes student athletes won't return those messages back. And when that happens, a college coach assumes that that player is not interested in their program. So a lot of times that player will drop off the radar that those coaches have on them and start recruiting somebody else because they feel like they're not interested in their program at all.
Great. And maybe the student athlete is waiting for the coach to contact them back, or waiting, thinking that another phone call is going to come when really they should have done what the coach said to begin with.
Yeah, oftentimes the student athletes feel like the coaches are going to cater to them. But in reality, if a student athlete really wants to play college athletics, they need to be returning as many phone calls as they can.
Good, good. Now, what about an example of something that a kid or some kids did right or did well in the recruiting process?
You know, I've dealt with a lot of kids who have done it the right way. I've even had some players that were really above the level I was coaching at that would return every single phone call. They were punctual, on time. They would send things back when they were supposed to. They returned every phone call, and they kept me as a coach in the loop from what they were doing with other schools. Were they visiting other schools? Were they talking to other schools? Were they looking at going to one of those other schools? They have some other top choices, and they just kept me in the loop with everything. They communicated with me. I think communication's big in recruiting. And when you're communicating with your athletes, and your athletes are recruiting, or the athletes that you're recruiting are communicating with you, it goes a long way in the recruiting process. And come down the stretch when they start making visits and they make a decision, I think it goes a long way when the recruit will call you and say, "Hey, coach, I appreciate everything, but I've decided to go elsewhere."
Good, good. So being a good communicator is not necessarily going to make you a better athlete than somebody else. But if there's two athletes that are very similar, being a good communicator can set you far apart in the recruiting process.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're recruiting some student athletes that are proactive, it makes you feel good about them as a person. It makes you more attracted to them as a player, as a student athlete, in whatever sport it may be, because you feel like this is a mature young man or woman. This is somebody that I can rely on and depend on. They're punctual, and they're proactive in what they do. So that's somebody that I want to recruit and bring into my program. It just makes your desire to recruit them even higher.
Great. Well, Richie, talk to us about the competitiveness of college athletics. You were at, your last job was a small Division II school, and talk to us about the number of athletes that you're recruiting and the sheer volume and the competitiveness of those limited scholarship dollars.
Yeah, there's a lot of kids that go through our recruiting database. I remember one year I was a recruiting coordinator at a school I was an assistant coach at, and we had over 500 kids in our database. This was a Division II school. So here's a scholarship school where we're only bringing in 3, 4, 5 kids a year. We had over 500 on our radar, and that would grow every day, every week, every month. That would grow as we found new potential players. So it was really competitive. I mean, we're only looking at a few spots, sometimes even 2, 3 spots, but we have 500 kids or more on our radar at that level. You know, as you get into lower levels, even more. And for us, it was extremely competitive. And I think one thing that a lot of people need to understand is that, you know, coaches are doing a really good job of establishing relationships with potential players. They're talking to them. They're having a good relationship by phone. They may have met them in person. But they're also having a relationship with maybe 10, 15 other people in a similar position, maybe even more. So, you know, as coaches are playing the game as far as contacting players, they're trying to find the best athlete they can to fill the voids and the needs that they have. I think on the flip side, student athletes need to do the exact same thing. They need to be contacting coaches and establishing as many relationships as they can, because in the end, unless they get a scholarship offer or an offer to play on their team, they have no choice to make until those choices are given to them. So they need to consistently be in relationships with many coaches, and then make a decision based on the choices that you have.
Great. Now, Richie, you've been with us here at Student Athlete World for a couple months. On this side of things, working with student athletes personally to help them get recruited by lots of colleges, which is kind of the opposite of what you're doing as a college coach.
Right.
What are you finding that families and student athletes are having the most trouble with as concepts to grasp or things to understand?
I don't think families quite understand how competitive it is. It's extremely competitive. There's only a small few roster spots on everybody's roster nationwide. There's only so many colleges. There's thousands upon thousands of high school athletes and just a few roster spots to fill. And I don't think that families quite understand how competitive it is. When I tell them that, I have a friend who was a Division III coach and he had over 1,000 people on his radar, they're just overwhelmed. Really, that's unbelievable. I say, well, Division II, I had over 500 and I had scholarships. So it's extremely competitive, and I just don't think people understand, the vast majority of people don't understand how many people are being recruited and how many kids actually want to play college athletics, just don't have the opportunity. So I think they just need to understand a little bit more, and I think we're getting the word out there that getting that exposure kind of separates them from the rest.
And maybe some of the problems are parents, friends of parents, high school and club coaches are telling kids you're D1 or you're this level, which a lot of times hurts the student athlete's ability to be realistic and target the right schools.
Yeah, recruiting is a tricky thing where somebody might be D1 in a certain area of the country, they're D2, D3 in a different area of the country. And they may have the same skills and abilities as a Division I player, but the timing wasn't right for a Division I team to bring them on board. So you really can't burn any bridges. You've got to be in touch with as many coaches as you can. You've got to stay in touch with them. You've got to return all phone calls, because at the end of the day, you just don't know where the chips are going to fall.
Well said. And to wrap up our time here with Coach Schueler, what advice would you have for the student athletes and the parents watching this video? What advice to the families do you have as you go through the recruiting process?
Yeah, same message really. Be proactive, be punctual, make sure you're returning all phone calls and messages and emails. Certainly don't think that your son or daughter is better than the level of school recruiting you or contacting you. Certainly reach out to all of them. Have an open mind about every school. And until you have options, you can't make decisions. So consistently look at everything and then make your decisions as time goes on.
Yeah, that's well said. When we always say we want you to be picky after you have lots of options.
Right.
Don't be picky before.
Correct.
Richie, great advice for everybody. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll talk to you next week. Cut. Good job.
Cut. One time, baby.
One take.
time.
Right.
Let me tuck my shirt in. I'm just messing.
I try to remember all the introduction stuff. Ready to go?
Yeah, I'm going to make mistakes, but your phone's going to go off the whole time, too.